All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome. On behalf of the Board of Directors, the Safety and Security Committee, the Water Safety Patrol, staff, police chief, etc., I'd like to welcome everybody. I'd like to thank Sheriff Hess for coming tonight. He's in the audience. And thank you all for participating. Police and security is a big deal. I'm going to present for about 10 minutes. I have 6 or 7 slides to go through, and then I'm going to introduce Ryan Washington, who's a consultant that's assisting us through this in identifying several options and helping us with this matter. The ground rules, very similar for those that were at the Water Safety Patrol Town Hall. We're going to present. We have about a dozen slides to present. We have 10 speakers that have signed up. We will go through those. Each speaker is afforded 5 minutes to speak. We are listening tonight, getting input from the community, and I'll go through that process. But it won't be a Q&A. We've opened up the forum back in October. We had a Security Solutions email opened up for all the residents to provide feedback. I'll summarize that in one of the slides. We've put it out on e-blasts. We put this briefing up on the website. We have lmoa.org, lmoa.news. My GM corners have covered it. So we're trying to get as much feedback from the community as possible and present that to the Board of Directors so that they can make an informed decision. The agenda, if I can get the agenda, please. Next slide. Next slide. So I'm going to go through a few slides. As I said, the town hall timeline, discuss the issue, and then, as I said, I'm going to introduce our consultant, Ryan Washington. He'll go through several of the options. And I want everybody to recognize, we're listing 4 options. There's probably about 20 or 25. You can mismatch it lots of different ways. So we're going to try to present the options, and then we'll listen to the speakers and we'll go from there. And we'll summarize with the next steps. Next slide. So the purpose of the town hall, I think everybody knows, powerful tool to exchange information. In addition to the avenues we've afforded everybody to comment, and it's fair communication flow by listening to the topics. So we want to emphasize, we want to listen to what the community has to say and then assess that. Next slide. We put this up because the community was established in 1969, and in summary, we've always had some form of security and policing in the community. There's various terms that are used: certified police officers, security, S-cops, armed, unarmed security. We'll try to highlight some of that as we go through here and then and address that as we move through it. But this slide, we've always had security and policing for the community. Next slide. So here's a summary of police officers. I'm not going to read each one. There's a difference in the training. Obviously, if you're a certified police officer, you go through the academy. There's more formal and more hours of training. The full powers of arrest, and I think a big item is lots of discussion around, police officers can respond to residential and the amenities and the facilities, the common properties of Lake Monticello Owners Association. I'd say that those two, the full arrest powers and that bullet, are probably the biggest significant differences. I'm not a police officer, so I'm not going to go through all the details of a blue light versus a yellow light. Some of the arresting powers can vary based on what the sheriff's office certifies and allocates for us, MOUs. So there's various scenarios in the difference between police officers and S-cops. Armed security, unarmed security. Next slide. So the S-cops, special conservatives of the peace, there's armed security, unarmed security, and again, this highlights it. The top bullet is limited arrest authorities and the training, and then security is basically going to focus, and their priority would be on protecting the common properties of the association. Next slide. So back in October, at the Board of Directors meeting, the board issued a statement and said, hey, we're in a crisis. We're facing problems with staffing police officers, staffing with certified police officers, and we wanted to enhance not only our volunteer effort on the lake, but our water safety patrol and enforcement. So those are the two primary areas that the board had put out to the community. Since then, we've gone through several scenarios. We've worked with the committees, the staff, and you'll see some of the results of that work. Next slide. So what are the challenges? Lots of challenges, as we all know. And the first one is this year's budget has 8 police officers in the approved budget. We're down to 5. Through attrition, we are advertising. We're looking to maybe change our recruiting ways, enhance, broaden out, open house, maybe go out to certain establishments, police academies, et cetera. So we're trying to heighten our recruiting and beat the bushes. This is not just a Lake Monticello police officer issue. I think the sheriff would corroborate. It's a nationwide shortage of police officers. The current environment, police officers are retiring. It's tough getting a trained, certified police officer hired. So we have 3 shifts, 24/7 coverage. Sheriff's Department is always, the primary law enforcement for the county. Lake Monticello Police Department supplements that, so there's increased response times having our private police force here. But we have focused on the first and second shift. The Sheriff's Department has been backing us up, as he always does, for that third shift. We've been stretched thin when you go ahead and put the lake water safety and security on the police officers. That obviously drives us to a different operating procedure. We need to figure out how to coordinate better with water safety patrol volunteers, how much enforcement are we going to put on the lake, what hours, what days, et cetera. So we're looking through that, working with the police chief and our consultant, and looking for your feedback as well on that matter. 24/7 is tough with water safety, speeding, lots of feedback from the community so far. So that's what we're assessing, and we tried to lay it out, some of the options which are coming up here shortly. Next slide. So the process, town hall, receive inputs from the town hall and those other venues that I put out there. The board liaison and the residents and the safety and security committee and the water safety patrol, we're looking for that to provide possible alternatives to the board of directors. So that's one avenue, and this is very much a part of that. Myself, the staff, police chief, the consultant, we're working with and in parallel to, because we wanted 2 independent paths to provide the board enough information and alternatives to make an informed decision. So that's the way we're working right now. This process will be inputted into those areas, and then we will feed the board with as much information as we can, and at some point they're going to have to make a decision. Next slide. This summarizes the emails we've received to date. So late October, we opened up the Security Solutions email. We've been advertising. Everybody give us your feedback. As of last week, we had 60 emails. Our communications director, Marika, has posted those on the website, summarizing them, non-attribution, but put what the feedback we've received. We'll continue to do that. These are the salient points of the feedback we received, and then basically the percentage of who's strongly in favor, who's not in favor, who wants to go in favor of maybe changing to a private security firm, et cetera. So we'll continue to refine this as we get more input and provide that update on the website. So with that, we have brought Ryan Washington in to support us and give us a different perspective and look at various alternatives. Ryan was with the Fluvanna County Sheriff's Office for several years as deputy sheriff, Virginia State Police trooper in the mid-90s for several years. He was the Fluvanna County Sheriff for 14 years, worked in the couple of governor's office in Virginia Alcohol Beverage Control Board, Special Policy Advisor, Deputy Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security for the state of Virginia, Governor's Office. And then recently, the last year or so, he's President of Prime Management Solutions Consulting, and he's been helping us out. He's got various training and certificates with the FBI, National Sheriff's Institute, University of Virginia, Weldon Cooper Center, et cetera. Certainly well qualified, and he's been a welcome addition to our team to help us with this challenge. So with that, I'd like to bring Ryan up here.
Well, thank you, Tom. And first of all, for those of you that do know me, which I look around the room, I do recognize a lot of faces. Know that I'm not a podium guy. I like up close and personal see. So, but thank you, Tom, for that introduction. And let me just say, first of all, thank you all for coming out. This certainly is not a subject matter to take lightly in any way, shape, or form, not just in these times, but in any time. And so I do appreciate you all coming out and at least showing your interest and your concern and where do we go from here, sort of to say. I also would like to thank the staff, and I'm not going to name everybody because I'll forget, and one person's name, I've been working with them for several months, still can't get the name right. But the staff has been wonderful to work for. The chief and the finance director and the communications director and other folks came together as a true team to try to figure out, you know, they're the worker bees. They're your worker bees. And so we wanted to make sure that we had the right people at the table coming up with what we thought was reasonable concepts and ideas. As Tom has indicated, no idea that we throw out is a catch-all, end-all. And that's why you all are here. That's why we're here to capture as much information from you as we possibly can. I will say, as reiterate what Tom has indicated, that the options are they're movable, they're variable in many ways. You can, you know, it's going to be like playing, you know, chess or whatever. You can move them all over the board. At the end of the day, you got to come up with a decision. And so the board is looking for input, not only from staff, but from you all as residents. What do you like to see? What do you, the want and the needs are going to be varied, right? We all want a lot of things in life, but what we may need may be the opposite. But we want that need and that want to come somewhat together to still be and remain effective, no matter what the decision may be. So with that, we're going to jump right in them. I will say that what you see on the slides, there's a lot more detail behind what you see on the slides. A lot of work went into just these bullet points, and not all the bullet points up there. As we worked through several work groups, hours at each work group to at least come up with the options. I do thank my friends for letting me borrow their eyeglasses because I left mine at home. They're probably not as becoming on me as Brian here, but they do the trick for me so I can see. So we're going to jump right into it. Here we talked about option one. We call it option one. And basically, you got a screen over there. It is to say, let's sustain the police department. Okay, we want to keep it, no changes to it. But at the same time, we have been seeing feedback, and we also talked about, we're hearing comments about we want to keep the police department, but we want to see a little something different. So what does that look like? What does that mean? And we'll be gathering that information as you and others submit ideas and thoughts. What should it look like? But if we sustain it, keep it as is, part of what we heard was we wanted them to perform water safety patrols, especially during, the high tide seasons, the hot times of the year. That Memorial Day all the way through Labor Day, pretty much, when the lake is really busy and active, so to speak. Your water safety patrol are volunteers, citizens, non-law enforcement, so don't have any authority to truly enforce any of the Virginia traffic or criminal codes. They rely on the police department for that function. And as you just heard, the police department is stretched thin like most departments. So how much more can they do? How can they even continue the services that they're trying to continue to do? But there is a need and a desire to ensure that the safety on the water is paramount for you all as homeowners, as well as any guests that may come on the lake. We provided added police presence in response to LMOA. Again, we can look at the data. We have looked at data. We kind of know and see and hear what that data tells us. There is something to be said about data-driven decision making. There's a story to tell within the data. And over the years, the need for law enforcement calls for service has increased. And it will probably continue to increase, but it may vary. Not everything may be of a high crime, so to speak. It could just be a call for service, a check on an elderly person, okay? But right now, because you have the law enforcement, that's what they do. That's what many law enforcement agencies do. We call them welfare checks, is what they do. Increased certified law enforcement compensation, commensurate with surrounding counties, and raise the total staff from 8 to 9 officers. And this was a lot of discussion about, okay, if you got 5 and you already budget for 8, and you try to stay the same, then how are you going to fill them? If you can't fill them in 6 months, how long would it take to fill them? And so all of those are the devils behind the scenes, so to speak, that we'd have to work through, and the chief would have to figure out what the strategy would be to try to get those vacant positions filled. But there's an added position because of the fact that there was a recommendation from the chief that he felt that to give the adequate 24-hour coverage, it needed to be 9. And so again, that data helps drive some of that decision. It can be pared down even greater as you get into that. Enhance the speed limit enforcement. Again, the amount of vehicles that you have on your highways and roads here at Lake Monticello. The speed limit is 25. I'm not going to ask for a raise of hands of how many people actually do 25. But there is a need to ensure that, hey, your roadways are safe at the end of the day. And he can only do that adequately with the amount of people that is decided that his staff, that his office should be staffing. So there is an estimated cost. I didn't create the numbers. I worked with your staff and finance director to try to come up with what we call maybe just a rational estimate based on history. And so there's an estimated of about $241,000 increase to the FY22 or to the calendar year budget. And then the impact would be certainly an increase in dues once those numbers are defined. Whether you stay with 8, whether you go with 9, whatever that number may be is going to define what that cost for service is going to be and be determined. So that's option 1. Next slide, please. So option 2, we said, okay, we've heard a lot about just if we disband the police department and go totally private, like we know of some other entities have, what would that look like? And again, the number one responsibility would be that the transfer of of everything that the police department currently does outside of law enforcement would be transferred to the private security contractor. There would be reduction, yes, in risk, but there's always a risk in no matter whatever you do. But there are some liability things that would be decreased because of the fact you're not paying for the same type of liability you would for a law enforcement officer. That cost would be passed along, or a lot of it would be passed along to the private contractor themselves. And again, there's a cost impact assessment in process. There's an RFP that went out, so that reason we don't have a number here is because that is going to drive what that impact may be. I will foresay that in all of these options, there's probably most likely going to be some type of increase, but we don't know what it may be. So I don't want to say what that number may be, and we don't know what it may be until you actually get into the evaluation. So that technical evaluation process for the proposal is in process as we speak. But it does show that there may be some similar annual dues and budget increase requirements as I just mentioned. So that option 2. So those are the 2 big elephants that we're talking about. But we did look at it and said, okay, we have to be creative like we do with everything else, right? At home, we become creative when we talk about our budget, so we got to do the same thing in our professional lives. So we looked at another option and we said, well, what if we have keep our law enforcement to whatever that number may be, and then we do a hybrid with in-house security civilian personnel, and we manage to budget, okay? So for example, if the chief was to say, I need at least 6, you got to give me at least 6, but I need a total of 9 people to do everything we do, then the other 3 or 2 or whatever that number may be would be security officers that would be trained. They have to go through a training by the state, Department of Criminal Justice Services here in the state oversees and certifies security officers. And they would be in-house employees of Lake Monticello, and they would work for the police chief. A prime example that I would give you for that scenario would be something like a college police department. So if you take University of Virginia or Virginia Commonwealth University, you've probably been there, you see that they have a mixture. Sometimes you'll see an officer in uniform, which is a full law enforcement officer, but then maybe sometimes when they're working a metal detector, they may have a private security guard or a security guard that's employed and managed by the police chief. So that's that scenario we're speaking of for a hybrid. Again, that number could be 5 to 7 for law enforcement officers or 3 to 5 for security officers based on once the chief and the staff identify the role and responsibilities of the security officer. What do we want the security officer to do that the law enforcement would no longer be primarily doing? Could be doing things. They could actually do roaming patrol work. Might not be able to always respond to a crime in progress, because that's a law enforcement function, but could certainly do some things to be visible and maybe deter, hopefully, crime from happening as well. And again, the cost impacts vary depending on the mix of law enforcement and security personnel. Am I messing you all up by walking? No, I heard you laughing. I wasn't sure if he was laughing or you were laughing at me. I wasn't sure. Option 4. So we said, okay, that's another option. So then we thought, okay, well, what's another hybrid scenario? It's just the opposite of option 3. What if we said we continue law enforcement officers, again, whatever that number may be, but we actually outsource the private security officers to a private firm. The security officers would be outsourced to a private firm that would come in and augment the law enforcement. There was a lot of variables that would have to be worked out, operational things that would have to be worked out, role and responsibilities identified, who's going to do what, who reports to who, all of those things would be worked out from a management standpoint with the chief. But again, the cost is going to vary depending on that number that is defined and allocated to the police department in its budget. So those are the 4 options that we really dug in. As I said, we had a series of meetings. We used a lot of whiteboards. A lot of pictures were taken to capture everything that we wrote down, and really brainstormed on, not just coming up with one solution, but really different options. And as I stated earlier, you could take all of those options and you can, again, play the chess game, right? You can pull something from here and move it over there, move it from over here over there. At the end of the day, one of these options is probably going to end up on the table. That's the reality of it. And so, again, the board and you as memberships and residents and owners will have to decide, do you manage the budget to make it work, or are you willing to pay more for the services you so desire? And so that's the options that we looked at. Again, as I said, there was a lot of work behind the scenes just to get to these 4. But again, I want to let the staff here know that we really appreciate all the hard work and time that they gave up to come up with this, because it wasn't just something that we just popped up and came up with 4 options in an hour or 2. It was several meetings that we started in January, the first part of January, and we're still working and still meeting as we speak to try to figure out, what's the best direction to go. So I appreciate your time and attention, and certainly at some point I'm sure there'll be a Q&A, not tonight, but at some point there'll be some questions. The board will continue to ask questions, and I'll continue to try to give the best insight that I possibly can, along with input from you all. And a lot of people outside of me have experience, and certainly want you all to share that insight and ideas with us as well. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks. So a couple quick things. I'll follow Ryan's lead here out front. He's wearing a suit, I'm not, so that's why I was behind the podium first. But we have looked into, some folks have seen a boat out at the marina. There is a V-hull boat out there. The police chief, Tony Abbott, maintenance crew, our mechanic, I've asked them to look and investigate in bringing in a police or a security boat. So just so you know, it's not hidden in there. We parked it in there because we're going to take it out for runs. We have 2 boats that we've looked at so far. It's part of the investigative work here, part of the alternatives. If we think that buying a boat like that is worth it, there is a process. There's the resolution proposal. It's an RP. We would put an RP together, present it to the board at one of the monthly board meetings. That would need to be a motion and approved, and then we'd go from there. We also, based on the initial notification back in October that, hey, we have a big concern with the police force, we did initiate contract action. We went out with a request for proposal, requesting bids from contractors. That they have been received, and that was what Ryan was referring to. We are in the process. We have a technical evaluation team that's reviewing that proposal. We're looking at the costs and the price and the different options. And again, there's lots of variables, so it takes time to go through it. They've asked, will we provide a boat, or do they need to provide a boat? That changes the price. Are we going to provide them the pontoon boat or a V-hull? Or, so there's lots of different variables and alternatives that are being vetted. We're looking into that. We're evaluating it. But at first blush, real top level, the price of outsourcing it to 8 or 9 police officers is pretty close. It's not a big discount or a significant discount either way. We'll get into the details and we'll disclose that and when it's appropriate, and we have the right folks reporting out on it.
Before we do, just to add, I apologize, but I think one thing that is important, let me stand up, and I should have said it when I was going over the options, but one thing to keep in mind, that no matter what option you go with, even if you go with option one and you just continue to fund the police department fully with additional officers, there's a transition phase that's going on, and there will be a transition phase that will have to take place if you go outside of what what you're used to, the norm, so to speak. So it's not just going to be, well, the light switch is like you walk in, cut the light switch on, and oh, by the way, we're going to have a hybrid situation tomorrow, or we're going to have a private firm in tomorrow. There will be a transitional phase, even with those options. Even if you stay with the scenario you have today, there's a lot of challenges even facing with that. The chief and I were talking about, how long it takes to hire somebody who's non-certified. And you're talking about a year down the road before they are really of any, I don't want to say use to you, but functional in the aspect of being on their own. So that's a challenge. And then there's the challenge of certainly hiring just certified officers, as the chief has been struggling with, not just the chief, but law enforcement as a whole. And so a lot of things will have transitions to them. How we currently do recruiting may have to be totally different. The style, all of those things will have transitional changes that will have to be worked through. And then, of course, if you go with any of the hybrid or the private, certainly it's going to be a transition as well. So I don't want to mislead anyone to think that if you go with one of these options, it's done and it's problem solved and everything's going back to normal tomorrow. That's not going to happen. It's going to take continued work and effort, not just by the police chief, but by the team, and certainly Tom as your GM.
Great, thanks, Ryan. So we're going to go to the next phase. We have 10 speakers signed up. We'll ask the speakers to come up at the podium and speak. There's 5 minutes per speaker. Mr. David Boardman is up first. Yes, sir.
5 minutes is not enough, of course, for this monumental situation. I would like to say, who the devil am I, etc. My father was a judge in the state of Connecticut for a small claims criminal. My godfather was a superior court judge in Connecticut. So I have heard the differences of these two judges discussing state police, certified police, as opposed to the so-called security people. And I have to say at the outset that the state police, certified police, always came up first. I have read a number of things, a wonderful position paper by Harvard Kennedy School entitled Managing the Boundary Between Public and Private Policing. And I'm not going to bore you with that, but they seem to gravitate also to having a certified police force and to keeping the police that we have. Many cases of liability based on poor interpretation of the law by the private security organizations have caused large suits and settlements where the public police organizations are known for training and correct interpretation of the various laws and regulations. Public police are trained, as we know, to carry and use firearms when and where necessary. More and more domestic violence, criminal activity, child endangerment, etc. Miscellaneous police involvement, which we all don't necessarily realize, includes such things as wellness checks, particularly for our aged population. Many senior citizens have used our police when they have had heart attacks and the ability to get quickly versus the ambulance has been something when things are too far away. We don't think about that if it doesn't affect us directly. Providers of private policing may include volunteers. These are individuals acting as unpaid, uniformed officials that just want to wear a uniform, but they may not be vetted. Our police are always vetted. They are in continual training. They are not shopping mall guards or patrol walkers. Non-specialized employees such as store clerks who watch for shoplifters and the like are indeed what we call public people. I presented some of these very basic facts only to show that the situation for possible defunding our community police in favor of a private force must not be taken lightly, but cannot be covered in depth within the 5-minute unit of time. Therefore, I will try to ask a few rhetorical questions that I hope might be cause for some concern and possibly help in determining your own personal opinion. How long will it take to train a new security force, particularly with regard to our LMO ways? When criminals in more heavily populated areas hear that our police are now down, how long will it be before they come up here to perform their criminal deeds? Will the force handle crowd control or water safety issues? We don't see any cost on several of these things. That's to be determined. Well, that's always nice to know. Things will be determined. I strongly suggest in conclusion that due to the many implications involved, that your board should consider holding a community-wide vote in conjunction with our annual meeting rather than rely on the opinion of a very small group of people opposed to the total population of LMOA. I thank you very much for listening. I hope you'll understand.
Thank you. Mr. Jeffrey Kuchis? No Jeffrey? Jeffrey Kuchis. All right. So next is Mr. Brian Dilorenzo.
Thank you. Never a good sign when the speaker before you bails, I guess. But I'm going to be real brief. Don't want to take up too much of your time, but I felt it important to come and speak. Give you a little bit of my background. You may not be interested, but just so you know that I do a little bit know what I'm talking about. Been in law enforcement for 25 years on the state level. Then was chief of police for 2 small villages. Got suckered into that, did that, a couple different police departments, and when I started hearing about this, I understand it. I understand the challenges. The first police department I was a chief of, 1 part-time officer when I got there. When I left, we had 10. So I went through the whole recruiting process, understand the challenges of that, and it's worse than ever, right? Getting officers, it's worse than ever. So, but my concern is, as you can imagine, I'm here to support the police department. My concern is that all those recruiting avenues haven't been addressed yet. I think there's a lot of steps to go from we don't have enough people to the police department's gone. There's a lot of steps between that. And I think as much time as we're putting into pursuing options, great. I'm thrilled that the board is looking at everything. It needs to be done. Hired a consultant. That's perfect. That's good stuff. But we really need to get creative with recruiting and make sure that we're pursuing all that first. There's no substitution for the police department, in my opinion. You know, you can't really put a price on deterrence, and it's nice to have private security. You know, that's somewhat of a deterrent. They're out driving around. You may see that. But my concern with that is how much control do we really have over that? And maybe it's set up that we have some control now, but how's that going to be in 5 years, 10 years? Costs change, may come in with some great contract and then costs went up and here we are, have no police department. How easy is it to get a police department back? Near impossible when that happens. Once it's disbanded, the control factor is going to be an issue. I don't want to speak for the sheriff. It's real easy to say that another agency can come in and handle things, but I bet if we got the sheriff off to the side that that's not as easy as it sounds on paper. He's probably struggling for people as well, and you have to worry about the coverage. I know one story where I saw that happen, disbanded a village police department, sheriff's department put a satellite office in there, total flop, didn't work. And it wasn't the sheriff's department's fault, it was just a manpower thing. It's easier, they were getting called away. I think it's really, really important for us to have a full police department here. Let me know if I'm running out on time, I can talk forever, so.
You got 2.5.
Oh, look at that, we're prepared. We're prepared to shut Brian up, perfect. So, again, my concern is that once the police department is gone, it's gone. Can the outside security, I'm impressed that we have the hybrid. We're talking about the hybrid. That's that may be an option, but to do away with the police department totally just scares me to death. I think a lot of people have moved here because of the police department. I know when I talk about where I live, it doesn't go without me saying we even have our own police department. There's a lot to be said about that. There really is. So I think that's really something to consider. Again, you can't put a cost on deterrence. I was really, and I'm sure this was a snafu somehow, but when I read what hours we had coverage, I was just slapping my forehead saying, who put that out there? That's not something you want to put out there. I'm sure the chief didn't have anything to do with that, but we want to make sure that we're not announcing that, right? I think that's really important. Yeah, I guess I got a minute and 27 seconds left, but I'll wrap it up. I really, I'm relatively new here. I've only been here a few years. Really impressed with the community, and I really want to thank everybody for the work that they're putting into it. I know it's not an easy task. Policing today is more difficult than ever, and having to make these decisions are huge. So for the board and everybody to take everybody's opinion into account, I really appreciate that, and that's what makes me know I moved to the right place. So, thank you.
So next up, thanks, Brian, is Mr. Bob Holbrook.
So I want to speak today to share my support and consideration the advantages of the community to go to security. For reference, I'm a strong supporter of police in general. In fact, my son has studied criminology in college and has done an internship with the sheriff's department. His goal is to go state trooper. Prior to living here at this lake, I lived in a very similar community that operated with the protection of a security force team that was well respected by the community and involvement. A few considerations I want to point out are the exposure to liability in managing increased cost. A recent example, please review why Massanutten decided to remove their police department. The primary reason was liability. Something we have to think about in the process of policing departments being sued. This is an insurance policy. They have an insurance policy to cover such matters. However, in light of the current state of affairs and judgments, the insurance can get exceeded. So let's say you have $5 million. Well, they awarded $10 million. Well, who's paying the other $5 million? It's not the county. It's Lake Monticello homeowners. So how are you going to come up for that money? We all have an asset here that is very important to us, which is our home, and I don't think anybody else wants to try to offset the price. Another important aspect to consider is change is around the staff coverage cost. By moving to security, we would have more patrol officers to handle the gate and the community. We would also likely save on additional expenses as such in vehicles, vehicle maintenance, uniforms. I would like the community and the board to remain open-minded about how this to change could potentially enhance our community service rather than a type of a negative. I feel very confident that the proper due diligence will take place around looking at the pros and the cons of these options. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Mr. Craig Hughes.
I'm Craig Hughes, and my wife and I and my mother-in-law moved into the neighborhood about last September, so we're really newbies. But when we started looking around, a bunch of houses, this, that, and the other, and we started talking to the folks in the community, one of the things they talked about was security and how well we were protected. I've spent 39 years serving my country in the Department of Defense, so I know a little bit about security, execution, and tactics. But we were impressed by that because I knew when I started my new job in Charlottesville, when I left during the day, that my family would be taken care of by my police force and our fire department. So that made me feel good, and that's really, I got to tell you, the main reason we came here. I'd like to thank the board and the panel for all their hard work because obviously y'all put a lot of effort into it. And I'd like to personally thank our police force for all they do for us. I had a bunch more notes, but as we went through the options, I was sitting there doing some simple math, and option one sticks out because I filled up my truck today, and it cost $60. So if you do the math on $55 or $60, that's $5 a month to keep and maintain a fully qualified police force here at the lake. I just don't believe you can beat that. I'm a big team and tactics kind of guy, and the teamwork you need to execute a mission like this, you've got to have good people, you got to hire good people, you got to have good people initially. You have to have a good chief, and you have to have everybody on board. Because if you're paying attention to world events, like the first gentleman spoke about, we're in a different time now. We're in a different time, and you see the trucks stopped going to the Canadian border. You hear talk of in the District of Columbia they're going to do the same thing. You see 300 cars in a parking lot in Richmond. Now, are they going to come to Lake Monticello? Probably not, but I would like our community to be prepared. I mean, there's a lot of things here that need to be addressed, but I think I speak for myself and my family that we would like to go with option one to maintain something we control. And one person talked about liability. Well, that's a big thing. But if you have the correctly trained, qualified individuals on your force that receive the training every year that they require, then if something were to come up, then we could back that up. But and I recommend option one. If you talk about numbers, and I know the proposal just came in, one thing I also did for about 10 years is contracting. The thing you have to remember about contracts is this, and I don't want to, contracts are like, let's say they come in for $300,000. Well, any contracting company is not doing bidding because, they want to make money. So if you have $300,000 as a contract, then they're going to take their profit out of that. So then you get into paying people less than what option one would pay our police force now. So I'd be very cautious with any type of contracting as far as that goes. But one other point I made, I think the second gentleman that spoke, the tall gentleman, we need to hire him on the police force because he's got more qualifications than anybody I saw. I'm not trying to make light of the situation, but it's just, this is important to me. That's why I came out tonight. I said, no, it's important to all of you, or you wouldn't be here either. I think maintaining, training, and hiring fully qualified officers and option one Paying the extra, $5.02 a month in HOA fees is much more valuable than trying a different approach. Keeps the team together, keeps everything cohesive, and protects us and our families, especially us that go out of town for work. And I yield back the remainder of my time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Mr. Rick Roth.
Hi, I'm Rick Roth. I'm not a law enforcement person. I'm not a security person, any of that. I'm a finance guy. And for those of you who don't know, I'm the chairman of the Finance Committee. And while I'm not here talking for the Finance Committee, because I'm on the committee, I've gotten to know a little bit about the finances here, worked through the budget, worked through the 10-year outlook that we did 6 months ago, all of that stuff. So I have a pretty good idea of what things cost and where we stand as a homeowners association from a financial standpoint. I think as the presentation showed, what we've been trying to do over the last, probably since the inception, is to provide 24/7 security to this association. Sort of is security in terms of access, in terms of enforcement, in terms of protection. And we've done it, at least for the last 25 years, with a combination of gated security and a police force in more or less the same configuration it is right now, although I think some of the titles changed in 2015, but that may be a minor point. Anyway, and as an organization of the combined gate security and police force, we spend about $1 million a year on it. That's about 20% of the dues we collect, so it's not an insignificant number. However, as we've gone through the budget processes this year, prior year, even before that, Chief Abbott has always brought up the fact that, he's struggling in terms of hiring police officers, that salaries are creeping up, it's getting tougher and tougher to get police officers, and as you know, police officers are used all over the place, in Fluvanna County, Albemarle County, everywhere. So there's a lot of competition for these guys. And last year or so, it's become even more exacerbated, because of the pandemic, because of changes in situations, inflation that has driven prices up, and we're just reaching a point where we can no longer afford to provide the service we want to provide, which is the 24/7 security with all the elements we've talked about here. It's just a matter of finance. So, as I think our former sheriff here pointed out with the various options, every one of those options is going to cost us more money than we got budgeted now to do something along the lines of what we've been trying to do or similar to what we're trying to do. And, by the way, our budget is pretty tight right now. Stood up here 6 months ago when we went through the outlook and talked about the fact that we're spending more money than we're bringing in. So, to me, the first question is not whether we want to outsource security, whether we want one of the hybrid solutions, whether we want to maintain the police force as it currently exists now. It's a question of whether the members are willing to approve a dues increase over and above what we're paying now and what gets increased each year to cover the additional cost. I think my newbie friend did the math for us and said it's about a tank of gas for his truck each year to pay more money here, pay enough money or increase the dues enough to support the police force. But at the end of the day, that's the members' choice. Members have to vote on a dues increase, and they get to vote at June, I guess. I guess we can have separate votes along the lines or something like that. But what I'd encourage the board to do and what I'd encourage you all to think about is you want to support the police force, you want to support the type of security we want to have and want to provide. Are you willing to support an increase in the dues so that we can pay for it? That's the important part right now, because if we can't pay for it, the discussion between outsourced security, maintain the police force, or hybrid solution is somewhat moot, because we really can't do it. We're going to have to reduce, in my opinion, the level of service, which may not necessarily be a good thing. I've been around here for a long time. I'm quite cognizant of some of the points that were brought up, that the level of security we offer right now is valuable to this community. It's worth something. I don't know exactly how much it's worth. I don't know whether it's worth an additional $60 a month or a year or not, but it is worth something. So I hope everybody thinks about it in terms of the value of what we get, but also thinks about whether they're willing to step up and approve a dues increase. And I would say that's really the primary question. Are we willing to increase the dues? If the members are, then I think the second question is a tactical question of whether we go with a hybrid, whether we maintain the police force as it is. And I've just run out of time, so I can't say anything else.
Thanks, Rick. Next up is Mr. Glenn Ruskin.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to speak. It's tough to be an idealist and get up after the finance chair has talked and dose of reality there. But my wife and I, we moved into the community about 7 years ago, and I think there's nothing more important than safety and security of our families. Sometimes we take that for granted, but I really commend the board for taking the bull by the horns and trying to wrestle this and figure out a way to keep us all safe. I've looked through the PowerPoint. I think that was great. I've looked through the metrics that Chief Abbott also had put together for 2021, and I really think option one is probably the best for our community to not only maintain but build and then sustain the Lake Monticello Police Department. If for some reason that doesn't work, I just throw it to Sheriff Hess. I think that would, we need a professional police presence at the lake. And before I discuss those two options, I just wanted to explain why I don't think it makes sense to be outsourcing our police and security needs to a contract firm. As I said, Lake Monticello deserves a full-time professional police department. We comprise 50% of the population of Fluvanna County. We've 8.8 square miles. We've got 4,000 homes and 12,000 residents. As Mr. Dilorenzo and Mr. Hughes said before me, based on my 30 years of corporate chemical industry management, I've seen firsthand, it makes sense sometimes. You look at your corporate costs and you start to think about, well, we'll just contract out services. Over time, those costs just come escalating back, and if you've taken apart your police department, trying to reconstruct that is nearly impossible. As the PowerPoint said, we've evolved from security guards and special conservators of the peace, or SCOPs, in the 1970s into a professional law enforcement agency with full powers granted by the state in 2015, and I really don't think we should abandon that privilege and distinction. The option that was laid out, and appreciate the work Mr. Washington has been doing with the staff, of the contracting out option, it looks to me that the cost, whether you build the police department, increase it, and hire more officers, is about the same as contracting out. So in my view, that's moot. And lastly, the special conservators of the peace under current Virginia law, and I may be mistaken on this, but my review looks like they have limited powers and authority and may not be able to address all the issues that we confront here at the lake. For example, I note in the past that SCOPs may not be able to respond to crimes in progress at private residences, so you're going to need to bring in the Sheriff's Department. In looking over Chief Abbott's metrics for 2021, I'll call them, there were about 4,500 reported, I'll call them activities. If you separate out the traffic offenses, non-criminal incidents, court appearances, still over 700 calls that it doesn't appear that a special conservator, I always get tripped up on this, SCOPs, we'll just call them SCOPs, may not be able to handle. I think, you know, the cost of $241,000 increase is very minimal. Sure, it's $5 a month, but I think it's a small price to pay for the peace of mind of maintaining a professional police presence 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at the lake. With regard to the Fluvanna County Sheriff's Office assuming police jurisdiction at the lake, I think, you know, certainly they cover the 288 square miles of Fluvanna County. They have, if I was looking at the website correctly, 18 patrol officers and 4 patrol units. If for some reason it's determined that our police department isn't going to be feasible for the future, I don't know how logistically the sheriff's office would be able to take over full policing here, but maybe they can increase their patrol units from 4 to 5 units. But in conclusion, I really think the preferred option is one, we maintain Lake Monticello Police Department, increase its annual budget to offer competitive salaries, and increase the number of officers necessary to protect our community. I would follow up on one comment Mr. Roth made, and I do think it's important that any dues increase should be evaluated by the residents here at the lake. And I am, you know, over the 7 years we've been here, you know, it's like, well, okay, $5 a month. There have been other dues increases, and I'm mindful of the fact that there are many, very diverse group of residents in this community and different income levels. You know, you start adding $5 here, $5 there. Next thing, you know, you've got $100 extra a month. And I know we have our assessments based equally across the board for all of our property owners, but just food for thought. I don't know if there's a way to think about how lake assessments might be based on property values. I don't know, that might be a hornet's nest, but. All right, oh, okay, all right, well, anyway, many thanks for your time, and again, kudos to the board for ensuring we have a safe and secure community here at Lake Monticello. Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn. Next up is Mr. Steve Smith.
Well, at least I didn't have to follow the finance board or a state trooper. Good evening. Have to have these. I'll keep this very short. My name is Steve Smith. I've lived at 6 Sunset Court for the past 12 years. I'm not a great orator, and I suspect you won't remember very many of my words tonight. But I would like to make sure that you remember Tom, our board, and Mr. Washington as they discuss the options. Our current Lake Police Department began in 1973 because we had a persistent problem with trespassers and burglaries. Clearly, we have a policing challenge facing us now, and we all need to know as much about it as possible before we make any decisions. I doubt anyone here supports simply disbanding our current LMOA police department and relying completely on our county sheriff. There are hybrid solutions. I don't recommend those. Having contracted hundreds of contracts, we had a term that was called too many cooks in the kitchen. If you have 2 people that think they're responsible for nothing, that's what they're responsible for, nothing. They can't both be responsible for everything. So what ends up is one picks what they want to do and the other picks what they want to do, and the stuff in the middle never gets done. Our Lake Monticello community is 2 things. It's a state of mind and it's a place. In 2010, when we purchased our home from the local realtors, they drove blocks out of their way to avoid showing prospective buyers the Eagle's Nest, which some of you will remember, and our Ashlawn facility. Today, we're proud to show off our new pub, golf facility, pool on the Ashlawn building. These improvements took inspiration, talent, and really hard work. The successful 38 cents a day program in 2019 to increase our dues had a positive impact on both our community and our property values. That was in 2019. Whatever way the new policing policy proposal goes, it will affect our Lake Monticello community for many years to come. Our current board and LMOA leadership is the best team we have seen. No egos, open to everyone, great listeners, extremely talented, dedicated hard workers, and they love our community just as much as we do. We, Lake Monticello, are a small city. There are 14,000 residents here, 40% of Fluvanna County. I smile when I get my annual dues statement. I know where my money goes and how much we get for every dollar. Our roads, playgrounds, golf course, lake, pond, marina, beaches, the new pub, pool, Ashlawn, tennis courts, and all the rest make me proud to say I live at Lake Monticello. Our LMOA dues with barcodes is less than half the dues paid by our friends at Nahor Village over near Foodland. It's less than 2/3 of those paid right across the street at Village Oaks. We have many more amenities than either one of those locations. Should we pay more? We certainly get more. Lake Monticello's Homeowners Association is the third HOA we've lived under. Our annual dues here are lower than either of the two previous locations, and the services and amenities that we have here far exceed either of the two locations. One publication, and shown up here on the slides, I saw that said it would cost $250,000 to maintain our current LMOA police force up to a full and sustainable level. I have two things to suggest we might look at. One, $60 increase in dues on all 4,200 properties. That's 16 cents a day. 16 cents. The others, think about increasing the gate decals from $10 to $25. We tip those gates with those decals 11,000 times a day. That's an extra 6 cents each time that gate goes up. Thank you for this town meeting and the opportunity to express our opinions. We look forward to the board's proposed solution in time to get it voted on at the annual meeting. Finally, just a short shout out for our fantastic maintenance team and the storm cleanup. Great work. Our state and county public works teams should take a lesson. Let's pull together with our board and support the actions they recommend. Thank you.
Next up, Mr. Stephen Tatro.
Close, but nobody gets it right.
Wait, sorry about that. How do you?
It's Tatro.
Tatro. All right.
Oh, well,
We'll get it right next time. Thanks.
don't worry about it. When I was first doing public speaking, I was told the best way to avoid being nervous is to picture the audience being naked. So sorry about that. I'm going to approach this issue from a different point of view. My wife and I moved here 2 years ago, and one of the reasons we moved here is because they had a police department. But to give you a little background before I go any further, I spent a lot of time running around this country playing tic-tac-toe because I worked for a Fortune 10 company that bounced me around like I was nobody. I lived everywhere. But I also, during that course of moving, I was on the board of 5 different HOAs. One of them is president. And 2 of those boards had the same issue you folks are facing today. We all are facing that issue. And we had both of them went back to police. One of them had a security force, went back to its own police force, and one kept its police force. But the biggest issue was to consider is with private security, they're more often than not for profit. Keep that in mind. That means their concern is their bottom line. And if they have problems with their bottom line, things get cut. And sometimes they don't share these things with the employer. So I encourage everyone to consider carefully that fact when you go forward. The 2 options here, I don't see any difference cost-wise between options 1 and 2. And given that fact, I'll vote for option 1 every single damn time. So I hope you'll join me in doing that when the time comes. I got 3 minutes to go, and to give it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up, Mr. David Webster. David Webster. Okay. So that was the last speaker. Is Mr. Jeffrey Kuchis here? Wasn't here as the number 2 speaker? Okay. So I'd like to wrap it up. That's it. That's all we have on the agenda. But I would like to thank the staff, thank the broadcast committee for doing what they do all the time. Staff members, particularly Marika, who's putting the communication out. She's assessing all the emails. I appreciate her effort for doing this. HR director and helping me out with the governance documents and scheduling meetings and whatnot. Rebecca Matthews, police chief, Tony Abbott, etc. I appreciate everybody's help. The committees, again, Sheriff Hess, thank you for your time being here. We're closely coordinating the effort, and it means a lot to the county and obviously our homeowners association. Board of directors, the members are here in the audience participating. They've been very clear, and they're taking this serious, and they want us to assess it and provide them alternatives. So the speakers tonight, special thanks, very sophisticated. Appreciate the time that you took and the professionalism in presenting it. Really appreciate everybody's effort in this, and so we're going to take it. We're going to take it in. If speakers have material that you didn't get to present, you can email it to the Security Solutions email. Give us the material. We're going to assess it. We're taking it seriously. We are going to give it to the committees, the staff. We're going to continue to mull this over with Ryan Washington. We appreciate his expertise and his guidance here. And then we're going to present it to the board. The board will take motions. And the board meetings that we do monthly, they have 5-minute speaker times there as well. So we're not doing this in a vacuum. People, as we go forward, we're going to present the information we have. The board meetings, we'll continue to put it out, etc. And then if it goes to the June 25th annual meeting for a vote, obviously that'll go to the community for a vote. So with that, I just wanted to thank everybody for everything. So thank you. Thank you, Ryan. Okay. That's it. That concludes.